Hi everybody, my name is Jens Larsen. Modal interchange is something that you can use to create some really beautiful progressions, and especially if you start working with borrowing chords from the minor key when you're in major. So in this video I'm going to show you 5 different chords that you can use like this. I'm going to go over how they work and how you can put them in progressions, and of course I'm also going to give you some examples of how they're used in both jazz and pop and rock music, because if you want to learn stuff like this, it makes a lot more sense if you have some songs where you can hear how it actually sounds instead of just having some empty theory. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar, about improvising over chord changes, checking out some interesting progressions or chord voicings, then subscribe to my channel. If you want to make sure not to miss anything, then click the little bell notification icon next to the subscribe button. The 5 chords that I'm going to talk about in this video are really all centered around one note in the major key. So if we have, let's just do this simple in C major, so we have a C major scale. So the note that's really giving us the idea that we're connected to the subdominant is the A. So at least the A in combination with the F, because that's really spelling out the 2 most important notes in the subdominant sound on C major, and also already most of the subdominant chord, which would be an F major chord. Once we want to go back from our subdominant to the tonic, then we can actually do that by turning our 6th degree here, or our subdominant note, into a minor subdominant note, that's an A flat, and then resolving that down to the 5th of the C major 7. So a basic progression could sound like this: C, and then to C7, because we want to go to F, and then we're F minor, and then back to C. So here I'm using the minor subdominant to transition as kind of like a cadence back to the tonic without going to the dominant. Of course, you can also have examples of it where you're not using this as a transition back to the 1, so you're just using it as another color. So that means you would have something where it's like we're in C, and instead of going to the F, we'll go to F minor. These 2 types of progressions will be the main ways that you'll see the minor subdominant used. Just to give you some examples, we can actually use Radiohead for both of the examples. So the basic 4 minor chord that we're talking about right now, I think the most famous example really is Creep, because in the key of G major, so G, then a B chord, and then up to the 4th degree, so C major first, and then C minor. So that's really a good example of how that sounds. You can also really hear it because in that song everything is really long and clear. So it's a good example of that sound also, where you can really hear, now I'm on the 4th degree, and I'm using the 4 minor, and the point of the 4 minor is just to go back to the 1 chord. Radiohead also uses the 4 minor chord just as a place that they can go to instead of staying on the tonic. I think the song No Surprises is really just D major and then up to G minor, so really the 4 minor chord and back. If you start looking for 4 minor chords in the jazz standards that you know, you should notice that most of the time in jazz we don't play them as triads, we actually play them as minor 6 or minor major chords, because in that way they're sort of played in a scale sound that kind of fits and relates back to the major scale where they're appearing in. This is really coming out of what happens when we're going to try to fit a 4 minor chord into a major key. So if we take the example of in C major again, so a C major scale. So if we need to fit an F minor chord into this scale, then we need to take the A and then change that into an A flat. So we have a flat 6. So then we have this C harmonic major scale, so C, D, E, F, G, A flat, B, C. Now in general, this interval is not that nice, and it's more useful to have a B flat instead of a B, because we anyway don't need the B when we're on a minor subdominant. We only need the B when we're on the dominant, because it's the most important note in the dominant function. So that's why it's easier just to change that into a B flat, and then we have this scale. And that's in fact F melodic minor. So in that way, if you're using F melodic minor on the 4 minor chords, then you're sort of still connected to the C major key, and that's why we're using that one. In jazz, one of the most common variations of a 4 minor chord is the backdoor dominant. So that's the dominant that's found on the flat 7 of the key. So if we're in C, then that's the dominant that's found on the B flat, so a B flat 7. Now the easiest way to look at this is that it's in fact just an F minor 6 with a B flat in the bass. And in that way, that's also kind of how it's going to work. But that means that we can make progressions that have like F major 7, so a 4th degree, and then go to the B flat 7, and then resolve that to a C major 7. And those progressions are extremely common in jazz standards. In fact, so common that you also almost have like a certain place in the form where they're going to be found, which is worth noticing, because if you have to learn a song by ear, if you understand the form, then it's going to be easier to figure out the chords, because you will expect certain things in certain places. There are not really a lot of examples of the backdoor dominant in pop and rock music, as far as I know, because most of the time when they have this chord, then it's not played as a dominant chord, and we really do need to have that dominant, the flat 7 in there, to get the idea that this is in fact a minor subdominant sound, because that's the defining note. So you will find it sometimes used where people are playing around with getting sort of a mixolydian sound out of their tonic chord, but then they're usually not playing flat 7 with a dominant, and then really something else is happening if you have to explain what's going on. In jazz, just to give an example of a very common way of coming across a backdoor dominant, if we take the song There'll Never Be Another You, that's in E flat. So here in bar, what's that? That's bar 7 and 8. It has a cadence to the 4th degree, backdoor dominant, and here you also really get the idea of, so this is a backdoor dominant with a sharp 11 because we're using the melodic minor of the 4th degree. So in this case, the backdoor dominant is D flat, and the 4th degree in E flat is an A flat, and we're using A flat melodic minor. The third type of minor subdominant chord that's quite common in jazz and maybe a little bit less common in other types of music, at least I didn't really find one in pop music, is playing the 2 chord but then as a minor 7 flat 5. So that means that if you have a normal cadence in C, of course that would be like D minor 7, G7 to C major. And then in this case we're going to substitute the D minor 7 with a D half diminished, and then to G7 and to C major. And that's of course just sort of making a minor cadence and then resolving it in major and using that effect. And that's what happens in quite a lot of jazz standards. I think especially Cole Porter does this all the time. So an example of that would be his song I Love You, which is really just a minor 2-5 in F major and then resolving to the tonic. And then the next part of the song kind of repeats the melody but then uses the major 2-5. So he's really working with using the minor sound sometimes and the major at other times, which is very typical for him. And that's a clear example of where this happens, but there are really a lot of those. Since all these chords are really revolving around one note, namely the flat 6, we can of course also use the chord that's found on the flat 6. So in a minor key, that's a major 7 chord. So if we have the key of C major and compare this to C minor, so the flat 6 is A flat, and of course the diatonic chord in C minor on the flat 6 is a major 7. So we can use this as a 4 minor chord as well. There are sort of 2 main places where you're going to come across this. The first one will be as part of a cadence, and again we can use this. I think this is something that's a little bit more common to jazz music than to pop and rock music, even though there are some places where there are a lot of flat 6s, especially in rock music. But I'll get to that in a bit. This could be a part of a cadence, so we can use this as an A flat major 7 going to a G7 to C major, and that's again a Cole Porter tune called Night and Day. So that's like sounds like this. But you'll also find that you can use the flat 6 major 7 chord as a more independent chord. And one example of that would be Triste from IVm. So that's in B flat, let's see, so where it really just goes from the tonic down to the flat 6 and then back to the tonic. So it's really just used as a chord that we can change over to and then go back to get a different sound. And the melody note is also just the major 7, so it's really just the 5th of the key. This next minor subdominant chord is very often mistaken as a substitution for the dominant, and that's probably because it's not really diatonic to the minor key. So that's the major 7 chord that you find on the flat 2. So if we're in the key of C, then C major, and then the flat 2 is of course D flat, and then we have a D flat major 7. Now this is not a dominant chord because it doesn't have a B. That's sort of the main reason here, and you can't really see it as being some sort of sus chord because there's no real reason to expect this to be a suspension of this in the chord. So I think the best way to understand the chord is really that the top part of it is really F, A flat and C, so that's just a 4 minor chord, so an F minor, and then we have a flat 2 as an extra leading note here in the bass. And I think this is the way that we use it most of the time in jazz. You will find that it comes along in standards once in a while. It's not extremely common, but if you have a song like You Stepped Out of a Dream, where it actually becomes part of a modulation and it works as a sort of pivot chord, bridging the gap between C major and A flat major. I think where it's most common in jazz is actually that we're using it to suspend the tonic. So if you have the ending of a song, then just a 2-5-1, taking us back down to the root and really ending the song. Now, this really sounds like a very heavy ending, and you can suspend the final tonic chord by replacing it with the Neapolitan Subdominant or the D flat major 7, and that sounds like this. And then later, if you want to resolve, you don't even have to resolve it. So that's where I think you'll find that it's used most of the time. There are some examples of this. There are probably not that many examples of this in pop and rock music. Though one sort of surprising example is Smoke on the Water. So, because in the chorus of Smoke on the Water, they go to the 4th degree, so the song is already in minor. So in that way, it's not exactly boring, but it is a Neapolitan Subdominant, which I can't say today. And the chorus goes to the 4th degree, so C minor, and then to A flat, and then back down to the tonic, which is G. And in this case, the way that sounds to me is more like a it's not so much as a dominant as it is really for minor chord, because it doesn't really have that kind of sound to it with a D7, which you would expect in a minor key here. The best way to check this out is probably just to start listening to some of the songs and figure out how it works and get it into your ears, and in that way get it into your system. I think all of these progressions are extremely common, and I think you can use all of them, maybe except for the Radiohead ones because they'll sue you. But for the rest, I would just experiment with using them in my own music, in my own arrangements, and see how that works. If you have great examples of songs that use sort of a very clear 4 minor sound somewhere, then do leave a comment. I'm always looking for more examples of this, and I'm sure that whoever is checking this video out are also interested in more examples, because maybe it's something you already know. If you can relate it to a song you already know, then it's a lot easier to learn, and you have a much more clear idea about how it sounds. If you want to learn more about jazz guitar and it's the first time you see one of my videos, then subscribe to my channel. The videos that I publish here every week are on finding some solid methods and good strategies to explore all the interesting things about jazz guitar and improvising. If you like this video and you want to help me keep making videos, then check out my Patreon page. It's because of the support that I'm getting from my patrons that I can keep publishing videos every week, and I'm very grateful for that. And if you join us over on Patreon, I can also give you something in return for your support. That's about it for this week. Thank you for watching, and until next week.